rather than demonizing the ego, it's vital to understand it to what it is and to recognize it as a tool. It's a temporary construct. It's a collection of stories that helps us navigate the earthly realm. And in non-duality and non-dual tantra, we come to understand and experience that all things ultimately are as an expression of what we can refer to as the one consciousness, the one self, if you will. Everything exists within a unified experience of self or awareness. Drawn into the ego experience, it creates the feeling of separation that polarizes things. But the ego itself is no less spiritual than anything else. But it does have a specific nature, and it operates a specific way within the experience of creation and spiritual reality. So we ultimately are wanting to see and experience the ego as basically a drop in the vast ocean of existence, neither separate from nor the entirety of who you actually are or what you actually are. So in the non-dual tantric spiritual path, we emphasize the interconnectedness of all things and the inherent oneness of existence. And in this approach, ego isn't rejected, but rather it's seen in its rightful part of the grand tapestry of existence. Instead of rejecting it, we become curious about it, seeking to discover its true nature beyond our limited ideas, seeking to experience it directly as part of our innate wholeness, and find understanding and acceptance for its manifestation within the oneness of experience. And so the ultimate idea here is that the ego is a functional tool. It's not good, it's not bad. It's essential for the journey, but it doesn't define the totality of our true self. It's a drop in the ocean, but it's distinct, but not really separate from the whole. And so a few helpful ways to understand the ego from more of the tantric perception, and this is one of the core ones here. Within the tantric traditions, and also another tradition that's referred to as Sankhya philosophy, there is a layer of what they refer to as tattvas, their qualities, that describe the unfolding of our experience. And I won't share all of them with you, but it basically talks about, from the perspective of consciousness, there are all these little divisions and distinctions that start to get formed that kind of create and come down ultimately to our experience here on Earth. And so all the things at the bottom, the very bottom of it, are what are referred to as the five mahabhutas, or the five elements. So earth, water, air, fire, and ether or space. You may have heard that before, of talking about sort of the five elements of creation. And at that perspective, like everything vibrating, particles of those elements. There's water and air and space and fire that make up everything. But as we're coming down, we're looking at the process of perception at one point before we get down into the earthly realm. And so there's this part of, there are three parts of the mind. One part is a higher intelligence. Then there's what's referred to as a lower part of the mind, that is the part that interfaces with the world and the sensory experiences of the elements and the life around us. And in between our higher intelligence and our experience of the world is a tattva that's referred to as ahamkara. And ahamkara is usually translated as ego. But in the context of ego, there's a distinction. The ahamkara itself actually translates out of Sanskrit. It is the little I, as in self, the little self maker. And that becomes the function of what it does. And so out of this grand experience of consciousness coming down into higher intelligence, it hits into this thing called the ahamkara that becomes the little self maker. And so the grand oneness of consciousness is focused into this experience of self, of individuality. And that's what the ahamkara does. So this little I maker, it focuses the expansive awareness of your truth to a limited identification with the ego's experience. And so this is what the ego, or the ahamkara, is. It is this limited experience of individual separateness is what is actually happening. And it's not good or bad. It's not something that needs to be destroyed. It's just part of the creative process and the experience that we are having. We're experiencing through the world of the ahamkara when we are in the world and thinking of ourselves as being a human in the world. So from this perspective, we can think of the ego as being the experience of our identity in the world. Not good, not bad, not something to destroy, not something to kill, but it is our experience of being our identity. It forms our sense of human self and contains the seeds of our personality, our strengths, our weaknesses, and various other things. It includes what we think of as memories and the stories that we tell to interpret our human experiences and the unfolding world around us. If we think of the ego like a character in a movie or a book, we can see that there's more dimensionality to the ego than just good or bad. It's filled with feelings, emotions, desires, motivations, passions, aspirations, as well as fears and attachments and character flaws. One-dimensional characters are not interesting. When we see a one-dimensional character in a book, like, it's just not interesting. It doesn't draw us. But when we start to look at this experience, we recognize that our egos are actually filled with complexity and paradox, conflicting beliefs, desires, beauty, talents, flaws, and self-perceptions that make the experience of being alive interesting as well when we think about it from the perspective of a character. So there's all this nuance that's happening inside of us that is actually part of the ego and in its arrangement within our sense of self-identity. And so instead of watching the story unfold on the movie screen, we're watching the internal and the external experiences of this ego character as it expresses in the world. And it navigates its experience. And when we have come to identify with our thoughts, our feelings, stories, and experiences that we're having, that's what the experience of ego is. So the ego itself, not good or bad, not narcissistic, not arrogant, not horrible, not good, is actually just the identification, the experience that you are having of yourself in the world. And so this is the nature of the ego. But how ultimately is it formed? So the ego is created from our karmic patterns. And so again, karmic patterns are not good or bad either. They're not punishing or rewarding us. They are simply the vibrational seeds of past actions and experiences that have culminated and resprouted, form our current actions, experiences, thoughts, beliefs, and stories that we're telling to interpret what's happening in our inner world and in the world. So the ego is a necessary vehicle to allow human experience. Without it, we wouldn't be experiencing life through a body in the world at all. The ego provides positive structures and habits that help us survive, that help us build our skills, talents, and gifts that we express in the world. The ego expresses our core character into the world. The ego helps us participate and take actions towards healing, positive transformation, and spiritual growth when such motivations arise within it.